Let me introduce myself and my team. My name is Rajat Sudana. I'm one of the co-founders of eGMAT, and I'm going to be your co-host today. Your main host today would be Shraddha and Harsha. Both of them are senior subject matter experts, and they're going to make sure that they deliver to you a unified approach to solving reading comprehension questions. They'll also, through this webinar, hopefully convince you that the means to acing reading comprehension is through a few key reading strategies and not by following some tricks. It's a fairly application-focused webinar. We solve some what I call as paragraph-related passages or paragraph-sized passages, or about 90-word passages first, and then we go and solve a difficult RC passage. Throughout the webinar, we apply the same reading strategies. We demonstrate how, as you apply those strategies, you improve your comprehension, and as a result, you're able to get to answers a lot more confidently and with much higher accuracy. Now, this is a fairly application-focused webinar, as I said, and to make sure that you guys are well prepared for it, we did send a few video lessons your way. They were on main point 1 and 2. If you've not gone through those video lessons, they are a part of your free trial. As you log into eGMAT.com, you should be able to get to that. Forgive me for the visual on the top left-hand corner. It should have those video lessons in there, but it did not. With that, we also have some upcoming free webinars. We have a free quant workshop. Think of that's tomorrow. Think of this quant workshop as a proctored mock test in which you not only get a reliable estimate of where you currently stand, but you also get to understand which subsections such as number properties, algebra, word problems, etc. are hindering your score, and essentially so that you can work on them. We also talk about certain core skills, or what we call them as process skills, that because of which you may not be able to score as high as you think. So as you fix those process skills, your accuracy improves, your ability improves, and consequently your score improves. Then next week, we have a free webinar on GMAT critical reasoning. In this webinar, we talk about the pre-thinking approach. This is an approach that we pioneered about 9 years back. It's an approach that's responsible for about 70% of all 700 plus scores that have been reported in 2021. In this webinar, we focus on demonstrating how this approach helps you answer the most challenging assumption questions with ease, and then so essentially we lay a foundation that you can then apply to evaluate, strengthen, weaken, and boldface, and as well as logically completes, and all of those other kinds of questions. Essentially any argument-based questions. Also, we typically hold webinars with our former students. Our students like to give back, and this is, I think, our 40th webinar this year. With one of our former students. And in this webinar, even though we don't do admission consulting, we invite our students to come back and talk about what challenges they faced when they applied to top B schools, and essentially how did they overcome those challenges. And this is very different from your typical webinars, because in these webinars, we actually make you aware of the profile of these students. We actually give you downloads with regards to this is the experience that this particular student had. These are the challenges that he or she faced. This is how they approached their YMBA question, their failure question, and how they used it to their advantage. Think of it as essentially a soul searching webinar, and if you guys face these challenges, then I think these are the kind of webinars that can help you think about your post-GMAT into pre-MBA kind of journey over there, or admissions journey. Also, if you're looking for scholarships, these webinars, in these webinars, students talk about how they got scholarships. For example, in the last webinar, one of our former students talked about how he got a scholarship from, I think about a 50K scholarship from UCLA Anderson, and then after that, how he kind of planned his journey from someone who actually owned preschools in India to someone who's now working for Microsoft. He's actually worked on Microsoft Teams. He's presented at Microsoft Ignite, and how he planned that entire journey. So again, register for these webinars. You'd get to know insights that you typically don't get from such webinars. Okay, with that, let's get to know you guys a bit better. I want to know, when do you plan to take the test, and what is your target GMAT score? Let's get the second poll question in place. All right, with regards to when people plan to take the test, the biggest group over here has more than 2 months. Then we also have about 16% of you in that 46 to 60 days, a very similar number in 31 to 45 days, and again, a very similar number in the 15 to 30 days as well. So a fairly interesting distribution. We have a few folks who are very close to their test, and a few folks who have, significant amount of time, I say an appreciable amount of time, where they can actually make a very significant improvement to their score. So anyone who has more than 30 days, 100-point improvement is fairly easy. And then we have folks who can actually make as much as a 200-point improvement to their end scores today, especially those of you more than 60 days or so. With regards to the target GMAT scores, you can see that about 63% of you are aiming for that score of 730 or higher, and another 30% around that mark in the 710, 720, but 7% of you are aiming for that score of 700 or lower. So with that, let me go right into the webinar pane. So right now the screen will have changed for you. What you'd be seeing is a presentation that says reading comprehension, and then a Q&A pod or a question and answer pod right below this. So this session from this point on is for about 2 hours and 10 minutes or so, and I'm going to divide this into 3 parts. In the first part, I'm going to briefly talk about eGMAT and your GMAT journey. For many of you, this is your first encounter with anyone from eGMAT, so I'm going to set some context with regards to what you're going to hear, because typically the strategies that we advocate are very different from the strategies that others advocate. So I'm going to add some context so that you can really figure out why should you trust these strategies and how can they help you actually get to that high GMAT score. After these 6 minutes, Harsha and Shraddha would take over, and they're going to go right through the core of this webinar. It's going to be for about 2 hours or so. And then if you have questions that are about your GMAT preparation or your MBA journey, and that have not been answered during this webinar, we'll reserve those. We'll happily take those questions in the last 20-minute Q&A, in which I'll be happy to answer any questions. Okay. Now this webinar is being recorded. We'll share the recording with you in about 12 hours or so. Okay, so with that, let's kind of talk a bit about eGMAT and how we started this company and what is our goal. So at eGMAT, we started this company about a decade back. Pyle and I both started this company and with a singular goal that we wanted to make test prep way more effective than what it was then. For us at that point in 2011, when we first launched the company, our goal was to make a self-paced online learning course way more effective than a classroom read instructor course. And accordingly, we essentially developed a learning architecture that's very, very different from the learning architecture that you typically see. When you think about learning architectures that exist today, there are 2 architectures that you're going to find that exist today. One is what we call as a book-based architecture, and the second is a private tutoring-based architecture. And most of the test prep offerings that we saw in 2011, in fact, even today, are built around this book-based architecture. When we started eGMAT, we actually built eGMAT around this private tutoring-based architecture, and we've continued to enhance eGMAT since then. In fact, in 2018, we surpassed our goal of being way better than a classroom course, and we set our new goal to be better than a private tutor. And you're going to see some evidence of some of the steps that we've taken around that in the next 3 or 4 slides or so. So I'm going to talk about a very small aspect, which is how do you build a personalized study plan, and how do you and how we approach that problem. So when you think about getting to the score of 720 or higher, and about 80% of you are aiming for that score or so, there are a few challenges that you have. The first thing you've got to do is that each one of you, based on your strengths and weaknesses, need to figure out how are you going to get to that score. So how much are you going to focus on quant within quant? How much are you going to focus on number properties versus word problems versus geometry? Similar challenge on the verbal side was SC versus CR versus RC or so. Essentially, you need a diagnostic that tells you these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses, and this is the path to getting to that 730, 740, 760 goal. Once you have a clear-cut idea, you then need to figure out which concepts you need to learn, and you need to learn those concepts. Now, merely knowing concepts isn't good enough. You need to get so good at knowing these concepts that that you attain a level of mastery that puts you in the top 3, top 5, top 6, or top 1% of scorers. And essentially, you've got to repeat this process again and again for every subsection. Okay, so let's see how we tackle that one problem of building that study plan. And we're going to look at a student who's going to start from a score of 600 and who's going to go to that score of 720. So at eGMAT, we help every student build their personalized study plan through this 3-step process. In fact, in 2020, our students built upwards of 20,000 study plans or so. So what's the first step? We actually help you quantify your starting abilities in various aspects of the GMAT. We call them various subsections. Then we define target milestones that are optimized for your strengths. And then we personalize your learning with regards to those target milestones in terms of if you have a high ability, let's say in sentence correction, we don't make you go through all the concepts. We make you go through a course that's personalized to your ability. So how do you get your starting abilities? To do that, we've created a product called a Sigma X mock. Sigma X stands for Simulated Insightful GMAT Experience, and X is that experience piece. And it's the world's only mock test that gives you ESR plus analysis. Actually, you take a mock test, you get your abilities, you get deep dive analysis on where you're lacking, why you're lacking, and so. Now, once you do that, you get those starting abilities in SC, CR, RC, arithmetic and algebra geometry. Then the next piece is to define your target milestones. And it's really important. Why? Because let's say you're aiming for that score of 720. There are about 20 ways in which you could get to that 720. Got to figure out which one's the most optimized for you, where most optimized means where you have the highest likelihood of success. And you'll get to that score in the shortest possible time. So to do that, we've created an AI-driven tool called Personalized Study Plan. In this, you put in your starting abilities and it creates those optimized milestones for you along with your study plan. So let's see how it works. The first thing you do is you put in your quant and verbal scores. Then as you do that, it tells you what your target quant and what your target verbal scores will be. Then it also tells you what your target quant and verbal abilities need to be. In this case, this particular student had shown a slightly higher tendency in SC, which is why we maximized his SC, target SC ability, and accordingly for him, he only had to do the bare minimum in RC to get to his target score. Then what we do is we actually create this personalized study plan where we look at your starting abilities and your target milestones, and we define how long would you take to go from your starting ability to your target milestone. Now, these estimates are built around how much effort you're willing to put on weekdays and weekends. Why is that? Because I think most of you are working professionals, but 95% of all our students are working professionals. So the number of hours they put in during weekdays versus weekends is different. Accordingly, you get a really clear idea of how you're going to proceed, what's the order that you're going to study in, and how much time per subsection would you take. Then we create a plan which is in which you exactly know on which day how many hours you need to put in and what is it that you need to do. This is a window where you put in the number of hours per weekday and per weekend. So this is a study planner that we've built so that empowers everyone to build their personalized study plan. For folks who are not our students, we give out about 20 slots where you can work with a level 1 GMAT strategy expert and build that personalized study plan. You can click on this to create your so that you can create your personalized study plan. Now, why should you do that? I think when you think about results, we've delivered more results than anyone else has, whether you look at the last 5 years, last 5 months, or last 5 weeks. And the reason we look at the last 5 years first is because in 2016, GMAT Club started its verified reviews policy, under which pretty much every review had to be verified using an official score report. This is the same link that you sent to business schools that you had to submit to GMAT Club so that they could do that. And since then, we've delivered more verified reviews than the next 4 most popular or more successful companies. In fact, we have delivered more verified reviews than all of them combined. And this is the data between 2016 and 2020. Now, what about the last 5 months, which is in 2021? When you look at that data for the last 5 months, and this is specifically between Jan to May, end of May, what you'd find is about 190, 700 plus scores, and this time I'm focusing just on 700 plus scores, not even reviews, just pure 700 plus scores, because most of you are aiming for those. But 190 scores that have been delivered, out of those 190, about 40 have been by students who've prepared by themselves. The remaining 150 have been delivered by the 11 GC partners, and these are the partners that you see. Now, out of the 150 scores, that distribution isn't even. We've accounted for close to about 40-45% of those 700 plus scores. Target test prep has accounted for about 44 of those, and the other partners together have accounted for a total of just about 39 of those scores. So when you hear the strategies that you hear in this session, you're going to find that they're different. They're different because they deliver results that are different. So this is last 5 months. What about last 5 weeks? And this is data again between April and May, end of April and May. And again, over there, you're going to see that we've delivered more 700 plus scores than anyone else has. In fact, we've almost delivered twice as many 700 plus scores as Target Test Prep, which is kind of the next highest partner, or 4 times as many as Crack Verbal, or pretty much many times as many as any of the other folks over here. Okay. So with that, again, help build that study plan, get started on your GMAT journey, and also connect with us on various social media channels. You can connect with us on YouTube, where you'd see about 170 odd success stories where people talk about how they improved their GMAT scores, or how they actually got into the target B schools. This is the world's largest collection of unedited debriefs. Also, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. We post about 6 articles on LinkedIn every week. For example, one recent article that we posted was how do you prepare for your F1 visa. It's something that our students actually, this was built based on our students' feedback who've gone through this process, some of the do's and don'ts of preparing for that F1 visa interview. Okay. So you can click on one of the links over here to connect with either with me or with our YouTube channel. With that, I'd now like to invite Shraddha and Harsha to take over and start with the RC part of the webinar.
All right, so welcome everybody. Let me first check that the audio is working, and after that we'll move on. If you guys can hear me, press yes in the poll. Perfect. So seems like the audio is clear. So let me take this away. Let me remove this. All right, guys. So I'm Harsha. I'm one of the RC experts. I'll be taking you through the next part of this particular seminar. So the question you have to ask is, you really want to do well in your GMAT, because it really matters as far as getting a very good admission into a very good college. It matters as far as your scholarship amounts are concerned. It matters for your future. So typically you should be targeting a score of 700 plus or 730 plus, or at least 700 plus if you ask me. So the next question that you should logically ask is, hey, as far as RC is concerned, what is it that you need to do to get that 730? And the answer for that is fairly obvious. We have seen time and again that a 730 plus score on the GMAT typically correlates to a 90th percentile ability. When I say 90th percentile RC ability, that means that in terms of RC ability, you're better than 90% of the other test takers of the GMAT test taking population. So that's kind of what you need to aim for. All right. So that's kind of what the goal of this session is. We're going to try to show you some strategies which, as Rajat pointed out, are somewhat different from the usual strategies that you would typically see with other players. And so be patient, go through this. I'm sure that you'll get good results. First, let's understand your current approach. The first step to improving in RC, or in any endeavor for that matter, is self-diagnosis. So what we are going to do is self-diagnosis. I'm interested in 2 aspects. One is called motivation, the other is called method. So the first question that I have for you is, how many of you truly enjoy RC? So I'm just going to put a simple yes, no. How many of you truly enjoy doing RC? And it's okay, it's a low risk environment. Feel free to be brutal if you don't enjoy. If you really love RC, make sure you put a yes. the results are overwhelmingly on the no bucket. So it tells us that traditionally, typically, we don't really enjoy RC as much. So the next question I have for you is, for those of you who say that you do not enjoy RC, why do you not enjoy RC? So you can use the short answer poll, that's the poll on your right. Why is it that you do not enjoy RC? What is it about RC that irritates you, scares you, worries you? Just dump it right there and let's have a discussion on that. These are the aspects that I want to fix right at the outset. Not a fan of reading, time consuming, I can't focus, boring. Yes, I hear a lot of students say it's boring, absolutely. Reading is a pain, length, perfect, dry topics. So through the course of the session, definitely we're going to tackle some of these questions. A lot of you, for example, are worried about time. So by the end of the session, hold on to all your concerns about time. We are going to discuss time towards the end of the session. Some of you are worried about topics. Hey, this topic is not something I'm familiar with. It's not an interesting topic. Yet again, that's something that we're going to talk about. Length, definitely we'll discuss that as well. In fact, we will take a lengthy passage towards the end of this particular session. The next aspect I'm interested in is understanding your current method. So typically, if you're doing RC, there are 3 ways of going about it. You can skim through the passage, take 2 minutes or 1.5 minutes to skim through the passage and then go to the questions. Or you can look at the questions and then go back to the passage and read as per exactly what the question is asking you. Or you can read the passage and then jump to the questions. So the next question I have for you is, which of this is your way of going about it? Of going about RC, your current approach. So just 1 second, let me bring in that poll. There you go. So what is your approach to RC? Let's see a few answers. Meanwhile, let me take this out. So very interesting. Around 65% of the batch at this point, around 200 people here. So around 100 of you are participating here at this point. Around 65% of you follow method 3, and that means around 35% follow methods 1 and 2. So what we are gonna discuss in this particular session is method 3. As far as we at eGMAT are concerned, methods 1 and 2, I cannot speak for any of the other exams, but it really does not work well for GMAT. As far as we are concerned, if you want to do well in RC and GMAT, you should follow method 3. So I'm happy to see around 65-70% of you are following method 3. One of the objectives for us through the session is, if you are followers of methods 1 and 2, we want to transition you towards method 3. We want to introduce to you how method 3 can really work. And for those 70% of you who are following method 3, hopefully by the end of the session, you'll see how you can do it a little better. Maybe we can find a better way to do it. All right. So very happy to see this. The next part I'm interested in is, how has this method worked out for you? How many of you have seen that situation, have faced that situation where you did all this, whether you're following method 1, 2, or 3, you sat in front of an RC passage, you read the passage, and then you faced a situation like this. You got stumped when you went to the questions. How many of you have faced this? Again, it's totally okay to be honest. The results are very, very indicative. All of us, most of us, unless you are an RC god, most of us have at some point faced this journey, this particular pain point that, hey, I really thought I understood the passage, man. And then when I actually went to answer the questions, I got stumped. So this is a situation that's all too familiar. Hopefully this session will help. The last question that I have, this is the last component of your self-assessment, is, in your own opinion, as per you, what is the level of understanding that you have once you're done reading a passage? So this is your self-assessment. This would give this is in your own words, where do you stand? So a good chunk of between 75 to 90%, which means you guys are almost there. A little bit more of a push to get you to it, upwards of 90%. 45% is between 50 to 75, and another 13% of us are in that less than 50% bucket. So the reason I'm asking this question is, let me tell you what is the level of understanding you need before you go and answer a question. It needs to be greater than 90%. If it is at this level, then you get that 90th percentile ability. Then it translates to a 730 plus score as far as the RC side of things are concerned. So a couple of you are in the 90 to 100% bucket, but for the rest of us, this is where we need to be. And let this be the motivation. Let's, through the session, pay close attention. Let's get this done. It's not that by the end of the session, you'll automatically hit 90. Of course not. We're going to introduce to you a process and an approach. And by the end of it, you'll be a little closer to being there. And if you put in the work, there's no reason why you can't be there. All right. So who's ready to get into the core of today's session? My goal today, and Shada and my goal today, is to help you ace reading comprehension. There are fundamentally three things that we are going to do in this session. First, I'm going to introduce to you 3 reading strategies. In total at eGMAT, we have 7 reading strategies. In this session, we are going to cover 3 of the most important ones. What is so great about these reading strategies? They enable you to extract much more from the passage than otherwise. So you'll find that if you're able to follow these strategies, your understanding of the passage, your comprehension of the passage improves by leaps and bounds. What is next? All right, you've extracted all this information. That's only the first step. We're also going to teach you how to use that information to actually solve questions. So as Rajat pointed out, we're going to start with 2 small 1-paragraph type passages, and each of those passages will have 1 question each. One is a main point question, one is an inference question. Through these questions, we're going to demonstrate how using reading strategies helps you answer such questions very, very easily. Now, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We're not going to leave it here. The third part of the session is where we're going to take everything you learned in step 1 and step 2 and apply it on an actual GMAT RC passage. So we're going to take a 700 level OG passage, one of the good ones. It's a very good passage. And you're going to apply everything that you have learned in steps 1 and 2 to do step 3. And that's how you know that these methods work. All right. So let's talk about the first piece. So I told you, as far as your approach is concerned, there are 2 components. One is your method, the other is your motivation. So let's talk about the motivation and inclination piece first. Simply put, if you do not like RC, RC will also not really like you. It's as simple as that. What you need to do first is change the way you think about RC. We saw the poll. Around 90% of us don't typically enjoy RC. That has to change. Why do I say that? Because that is the level of immersion that you need. It's only when you truly start enjoying RC that you'll start seeing results. And what do I mean by that? Think about it. If you do not enjoy something and you're going into something with a very negative mindset, what are your chances of doing very well in that? You need to change that particular thing. So from today, from this moment, whatever the topic, it does not matter what the topic is. Through the topics that we are going to discuss today, you're going to truly see that. We're going to pick topics that most of us are not really familiar with. All right. The topic does not matter. The length of the passage does not matter. The language used in the passage does not matter. It could be simple, it could be extreme Shakespearean English, it does not matter. Whatever the topic, whatever the length, whatever the complexity of the language, absolutely no problem. That's the first piece. You need to have that belief. You will be able to solve all these passages, and more importantly, when you're solving these passages, go in with that mindset that, hey, I don't care what the topic is, I don't care how long it is, but in those 3 to 4 minutes that I'm reading, that I'm devoting my time and energy for this passage, in those 3 to 4 minutes, I'm going to give it my all. My job is to understand every nut and bolt the author has used to make this passage. That's the attitude that really, really helps you in RC. Is this clear? Can we have a few yeses if this thing is coming across? Remember, any strategy that I introduce, any approach or process that I teach you, if you do not have the right mental framework for it, if you don't have that right mental makeup for it, it's not going to seep in. So the first thing is, don't be scared of RC. Don't go like, hey man, I don't like this topic, I don't enjoy this topic. From now on, whatever the topic, 100% immersion. You're just going to get into it. Our job is, in those 3 to 4 minutes, you're going to understand everything about that topic. If that is clear, let's talk about specifically the reading strategies that we're going to address today. All right. So firstly, at the sentence level. Sentence level is what I call the molecular level. So words would be atoms, sentence would be molecules. Typically, one of the frequent problems that students face is, hey, easy sentences anybody can understand, but sometimes you face all these long, convoluted, huge sentences which are very difficult to comprehend. So we're going to see how do we comprehend those kinds of sentences. We're going to see how we break down sentences into manageable chunks, assimilate the meaning chunk by chunk, and understand the whole sentence. That's the first reading strategy. We're going to see this in application. The second strategy is keywords. Keywords is actually my favorite reading strategy. What are keywords? In simple words, keywords are very specific words or phrases that are used by the author either to convey some specific meaning or to logically and coherently organize the particular passage. Now, the beauty about keywords is these are not technical jargon that none of us are familiar with. Keywords are words that you know. It's a words that I know. It will be words like therefore, hence, however, moreover. It's words like those typically. And these are all words that you know. The beauty is, if you're able to pay some attention to keywords while you're reading the passage, you can kind of unlock the author's intent very well. I'll give you an example. What you're supposed to do from now on, from this exercise, from this moment, whenever you see what I call as keywords, you don't just blindly read on. The problem is when we typically read a storybook or we read your newspaper articles, we tend to just rush through it and skim through it. We don't pay attention to some specific words. From today, when you see a keyword, you will pause. Then you will ask the question, hey, why is this keyword here? Why did the author put this word here? That gives us an idea about the author's intent. Then we can predict what will follow. What will the author say next? And how that helps is when you do that prediction, you're priming your brain to absorb that information better. You already know to some level what to expect. Therefore, when the information is put in, even if it's put in a slightly complicated way, because you understand the intent well, the ability of your brain to absorb that information is much, much higher. Simple example for you. Let's say in a passage you see a sentence like this: work from home has led to an increase in employee productivity. All right, so something positive is being said about work from home, and then you see this word however. Pardon my handwriting, it doesn't translate very well. Then you see this word however. Typically when you read it, you might so far have just skipped this word however. What I want you to do from today is, when you see this word however, pause, ask that question, why is this however here? And therefore what will follow? So the author has told you something positive about work from home, and then he said however. So who can tell me what is going to logically follow? What will the author say next? That's a question. Put it on the short answer pod. Contrast, opposite, reverse, something negative. Absolutely. You guys are getting this. You guys know this intuitively because these words are words we're familiar with. All I'm asking you to do is, from now on, pay attention to these words when you're reading the passage. It will improve your comprehension. Now let's go to the third reading strategy. And this is frankly the most underrated reading strategy. Honestly, when a lot of students come to me and say, hey, I find it very difficult to comprehend this complex, especially humanities kinds of passages, the one thing I ask them is, are you summarizing well enough? Summarization is that one skill that helps you really understand the essence of complex passages. So the question you should ask is, when should one summarize? You should summarize at the end of paragraphs. You should summarize at the end of each paragraph. You should summarize at the end of the passage as well. But not just that. You should also summarize within a paragraph. Even within a paragraph, whenever you hit a point of information overload. Sometimes you will always come across a particular situation when you feel that, okay, this is a lot of information. It's becoming hard to retain this. Whenever you reach a point like that, pause right there. Summarize everything in the passage so far. That way, before you go to the next step, you actually understand what's happening. You have understood what's happening. By summarization, I mean that you're able to express it in your own words. If you're able to do that, then understanding the next part of the passage is much easier. I think the audio is clear at this point. Yeah, I don't think the audio is an issue at my end at this point. All right. So summarization can help you understand extremely complex stuff. All right. So we'll get to it. Don't worry. The core of the session is right here. So again, for all of you who talk about, hey man, is this all possible in time? All I'm saying is, hold on. All your time related concerns, hold on to those. We'll address those. For now, no time pressure. Read these slowly. Your job is to understand this as best you can. So Who's ready to solve the first passage? Let's start auspiciously with a few yeses. Who's ready to start? Perfect. Let's go. Let's have that enthusiasm here. So here's question 1. What I'm going to do is, let me take this off. Once you guys are done reading the passage, click on yes. When a majority of you have done reading the passage, then I'll introduce the question. Okay? So here you go. All the best. All right, so a good number of you are done reading the passage. So I'm going to introduce the question. So let me move this away first thing. And let me make sure that for any of you who want to read the passage is there on your top right. Meanwhile, I'm going to introduce the poll. So all those who are participating, please click on still solving. That way, the group will time itself. Rather than me pushing you to finish at a particular point of time, the group can time itself. You guys decide when I can move on. Perfect. So here's the question, guys. The poll is on your right. If you want to refer the passage, it's on the top right. Here's the question. All the best. Most of you are done. Let's take another 10 seconds. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to end this poll. And let me quickly broadcast the results. It's very interesting. So 48% of you chose option D and that means 52% of you chose A, B, and C. It's very interesting. So we're going to discuss this passage entirely. Before that, let me quickly get some feedback. How was this question for you? Let me clear all answers, reopen this. How did you find this passage? Forget the question. How was the passage for you? Let's focus on passage comprehension first. Easy. Wow, I love that spirit. Most of the people typically do not say easy for this, so that means probably the level of the students in this session is at a higher level. I'm very happy to see that. Then I also see quite a few complex mediums as well. Okay. So let's see. The real test is more than the question itself. I want to see how many of you got all the points correctly, all the possible information that you can extract. I want to see how many of you got that. So let's get right to it. Let me clear this. Let's get into the passage analysis. So do pay close attention. This is the core of the what you are here for. How do we really use those reading strategies? Okay. So, and how we're going to do this is I'm going to show you where you need to focus your attention, what you need to focus on, and you guys are going to tell me what I need to know, or rather what you guys need to figure out. You guys are going to tell me more than me. Okay, that's going to be very interesting. So let's start. Bordering on the extreme. One definition of ethnocentrism considers it something. So let's kind of pause here. I kind of want to understand. We have already only hit 8 words, but there's already quite a few things there. The first question I have for you, and you can use the short answer part for answering my questions. When you say bordering on the extreme, what does that indicate? What does it tell you? Why did the author put bordering on the extreme there? What is he trying to say? Yes, some of you are now getting it. Extremist view, it's one extreme definition. So what is another word for extreme? Extreme nature of whatever is following. Absolutely. So the author is already telling you that, hey, whatever is following, this one definition which follows, whatever the definition is, hey, it's somewhat extreme. Or in other words, it's not your general regular mean. It's not the mean definition. It's not your average typical definition. It's a somewhat extreme. Or in other words, what you would call as exaggerated definition. That's the first inference you draw just from those first 4 lines. Everybody with me so far? Bordering on the extreme suggests that whatever is following this one definition, the author is calling it as it's a little extreme, it's a little exaggerated. That's information number 1. Now let's move on. One definition of ethnocentrism. Let's call ethnocentrism as EC for simplicity. Now tell me, why did the author use the words one definition of EC? Why not the definition of EC? He could have said bordering on the extreme, the definition of EC considers it to be something. Why did he actually use the word one definition? What is he trying to tell you? He or she. Sorry. What is he or she trying to tell you? Yes, you guys are getting this. Not multiple extreme definitions. Multiple definitions exist. That's one thing. There's something else also. You guys got one of the inferences, but there is one more inference that you can draw. And that's what I want to draw your attention to. So inference number 1, when you say one definition of EC, definitely it does mean that there, in all probability, there are multiple definitions. The other inference you can draw from this, thanks to this beautiful keyword one definition, is the author, you do not know 100% whether the author agrees with this definition. If the author told you the definition of EC is this, that means you know this is the definition as per the author. Exactly, somebody's pointing it out. It's not necessarily the author's definition. It could be. You cannot say it's not author's view also, for somebody who pointed that out. It could be the author's definition. It could be something the author agrees with. It may not be something the author agrees with. We are not 100% sure that the author agrees with it. That's the core point. That's the second inference that you should draw. Everybody with me so far? It's just the first 8 words, but we already have quite a bit of information that we have extracted. All right, now let's move on. So essentially, bordering on the extreme means that whatever definition is being presented, it's a little exaggerated. One definition of EC means that firstly, there are probably multiple definitions, and secondly, one definition, not necessarily the author's definition. So let's move on. So one definition of EC considers it a schismatic in-group, out-group differentiation. Let's pause here. See how I'm slowly pausing, and it's a big sentence, so we're going slowly. Now, I don't know how many of you know the meaning of schismatic. I'll be frank, this is not a word that I'm particularly familiar with. I know the word, but I never bothered knowing the meaning. But it's okay. I want to show you that it really does not matter. So let's ignore schismatic. Let's say considers it a schismatic in-group, out-group differentiation. Can I say this means that, hey, he's telling you that there is some difference between something called an in-group and something called an out-group? Everybody on board? Right? Absolutely. Forget schismatic. So considers it a schismatic in-group, out-group difference. So some difference is there between in-group and out-group, whatever that is. In which, now in which is a keyword which tells me that what follows is a description of what was presented. So the passage talked about some kind of a differentiation. Now we are going to see the description of that differentiation. That's as simple as that. That's a keyword. This is where I pause, and before I read this, I kind of predict. So now I know that he's going to talk about what exactly this differentiation is. That's the thought process. Now, internal cohesion, relative peace, solidarity, loyalty, devotion to the in-group. Very complicated. Let's pause here. Here's the core point I want you to take away from this. When you see such convoluted text, this is a point of information overload for me. I'm not going to by heart this entire definition. That's not how GMAT RC works. They're not going to ask you, please tell me what all was mentioned about differentiation. They're not going to ask you, you need to mention relative peace, solidarity, loyalty. There's no point mugging it up. What you really need to do is understand the essence of what this says. Or in other words, summarize in your own words what internal cohesion to this particular in-group, what does it mean? So who can tell me in your own words what that means? Internal cohesion, relative peace, solidarity, loyalty, devotion to the in-group. In your own words. Summarize in one sentence, one phrase, if you can, rather than one word. That will be a little easier for you. It's not in-group traits, it's attitude towards the in-group. But you guys are on the right track. Love for in-group. That's a very good answer. It need not be love. It can be any positive sentiment, but essentially you can call it love also. Some kind of a positive feeling, love, like, whatever it is, towards what is being called as in-group. Right? Peace, solidarity, loyalty, devotion, they're all positive emotions. So some kind of positive emotion towards the in-group. That much we are clear? Unity also. All positive sentiment. It's okay. Whatever he says. He doesn't mention unity, but yeah, he does mention cohesion. Feel free. So, end of the day, positive sentiment towards in-group. They're not features. This is actually the definition. These are not features of in-group. These are not the features of the in-group. This is attitude towards the in-group. There's a difference. Don't make that mistake of thinking they're features. Perfect. So, one definition of EC considers it to be some kind of a difference between in-group and out-group, in which some positive feeling towards the in-group are correlated with. What is the meaning of correlated with? In other words, what is correlated with? Yeah, it's not constituents per se, it's the positive feeling of any sort. Good question. Yeah, what is correlated? Not compared, linked. Yeah, it is dependent at the end of the day, but essentially there is a link between those two, interrelated. Correlation is not comparison. Some of you are making some mistakes in those answers, but relation. Essentially, what is a correlation? If A happens, B also happens. Not necessarily causality. A happens, and because A happens, B happens, that is causality. A happens and somehow B also happens, that is correlation. There is some linkage between A and B. Somehow they are linked, that's it. So positive feeling towards the in-group is correlated with or is linked with a state of hostility towards out-group. So positive feeling towards in-group is correlated with or linked with negative feeling towards out-group. So do you guys realize that essentially you summarized a very complex piece of text in an easy to understand manner, which you guys told me. I was just guiding here. How many of you realize that? That's a very important learning here. Complex text, it does not matter. You can still do this. Perfect. And that's where the approach is very important. Now let's continue. state of hostility or negative feeling towards outgroups, which are often perceived as subhuman and or the incorporation of evil. Subhuman gives you a clue. It tells you that when you're talking about groups, we're talking about human groups, human beings, not groups of some potatoes and bananas. We're talking about human beings. That also gives us some information. So end of the day, essentially, what do we know? From bordering on the extreme, we know that whatever definition follows is exaggerated. Then whatever this exaggerated definition, what does it say? Hey, there is this differentiation between in-group and out-group. And as per this differentiation, love for your own people or positive feeling, any positive feeling towards your own people in group is linked with negative feeling, let's say hatred towards outside people, out group. That's it. That's it. So the only criticism here, for somebody who's talking about criticizing, the only criticism here is that the author believes this definition is a little extreme. The only criticism the author gives is, hey, this definition is a little extreme. He's not criticizing ethnocentrism. He's not criticizing the concept. At best, it's a mild criticism of that one definition. All right. So fundamentally, if you have understood this, there are three pieces of information that you could have derived from this. Firstly, one definition of EC does not mean author's definition. Where do you get that from? You would have got that from this one definition. If you had paid attention while reading, you would have got that. This definition is a bit exaggerated. If you had focused on bordering on the extreme and asked that question, what is this exactly trying to tell you? Then you would have got that, hey, whatever this definition which is presented, it's a little exaggerated. And then what exactly does that definition say? If you had summarized effectively this entire complicated, convoluted text with a lot of words thrown in simple words is, hey, there is this correlation. Love for own people is linked to hate for outside or foreign people. It's as simple as that. Now the question I have for you is, how many of you could not get all of these points? Some of you would have got all of these points, but select the items that you were not able to understand, which you were not able to understand from your analysis when you did this. If you got this all, fantastic. Which means you're able to extract all the information from a fairly complex piece of text. But if there's something you missed out, that's where your learning is. For example, if you missed out on point one, that means your core focus area is, hey, you should have paid attention to this one definition. You should have paused there, asked that question why it's there. So let me broadcast the results. It's very interesting, right? So around 26% of you got all, just fantastic. 75% of us have not got all these points. When do you hit that 90th percentile, which I'm talking about? When you are able to get these 3 points. That's when you get it. So, shall we go to the question now? I hope you guys are finding this interesting, right? We're going slow, but we are extracting information at a very, very high level. This is the level that you will never get by skimming. And if you're going through the questions first and then jumping to the passage, I wish you the best. It's very difficult to get these. We will keep the Q&A panel, but if you want, I can, minimize it a bit. All right, because questions are coming in. Some of you always have questions. I can't remove it entirely. Let's go to the question now. If this is clear, this piece should not take too much time. What is the main purpose of this particular passage? Or in other words, what is it the author wants you to take away from the passage? Option A was chosen by around 8% of you. It says to criticize a concept that encourages hostility towards people not belonging to the same group. Everything that I've highlighted and read here, by the way, is the reason it's incorrect. All right. So, first question, is the author criticizing the concept, or is the author at some level at max criticizing one definition of that concept? That too, as per him, that definition is a little exaggerated. So it's not really the core concept of EC. The key, exactly. He is given a mild criticism of that one definition, and that definition, as per him, him or her, it's exaggerated, which means he's not really criticized EC as such. That's the first point. The second point is, does EC, the concept here refers to EC. The question you have to ask is, in that definition, does EC anywhere encourage hostility? All we know is hostility is there. Love for in-group is correlated with hate for out-group or hostility towards out-group. All we know is hostility exists. We don't know that hostility was encouraged by the concept. So that's why option A is incorrect. Let's go to option B. Option B, you should not have fallen for. 16% of you fell for this. Firstly, the first confusion is you might have misunderstood definition to be features. As I told you, those are just features. That's just parts of the definition. Remember, a definition of an artificial superintelligence is different from the features of the artificial superintelligence. And here, what you are given is definition, that too one particular definition of ethnocentrism. There is no discussion about features of ethnocentrism, right? That's the first reason you should have rejected option B. The second reason is there is no evaluation happening. In simple words, to evaluate something means to assess something. In typical GMAT RC, take it from me, typically evaluation implies that there is some discussion about the positives and the negatives. That's how you assess something, right? How do you assess something? You consider the pros, consider the cons, and then you make a decision. If that discussion of pros and cons or pluses and minuses is not there, 99% it's never an evaluation. All right. Then the question is an evaluation happening here? Has the author talked about the positives of ethnocentrism? Has the author talked about positives of ethnocentrism? No, right? Absolutely. So there, just right there again, apart from the features point, you could have rejected this for the evaluation point as well. Now let's come to option C. If there's a question, just put it on the Q&A if I'm missing a question. All right. Let's look at option C. Again, 26% of you fell for this. To define the concept of EC, which leads to hierarchy among social groups. This is the easiest way to reject. All we know is love for one group is correlated with hate for one group. Do we know there is a hierarchy? Or did you just assume that this is a hierarchy? There's no necessary hierarchy here, right? There's no mention of hierarchy. It's a trap option, absolutely. That's the first reason you reject it. The second reason you reject it is, again, the author presented one definition of EC. He did not define EC. If that one definition was the definition, then you can say the author defined EC. But here, he's just given you one definition of EC. That also, he's explicitly telling you, hey, this definition is a little bit, exaggerated. It's a little extreme. So has the author really defined EC for you? Not really. Again, two reasons why. Which brings us to the correct answer, which 48% of you have got. To introduce the concept of EC by presenting a view on it. Everybody clear so far about the other options? Now let's look at option D. It says to introduce the concept of EC by presenting a view on it. Has the author done that? To you, the reader, or to you or me, who are the readers of this passage, the author has introduced the concept of EC. How has he done that? He's done that not by presenting his or her opinion. He's not given his view on EC. No. But he's given one definition of EC. Why is that the correct answer here? Let me give you a simple example to make this a little more clear. Imagine that tomorrow you guys come to my house for a party. Okay. Now imagine that I introduce you to a friend of mine. Okay. In this party, I introduced you to my friend. Here's a question. I'm introducing you to this person, but I'm not giving you my opinion on that person. In reality, that person might be a super villain, but I'm not telling you that. My view is this guy is a bad guy, he's a super villain, but I'm not telling you that. I'm just introducing you to this person at a party. But end of the day, without presenting my view, what I've achieved is I've introduced you to that particular person. Similarly, without presenting his or her own view, the author has introduced you to the concept of EC. How many of you are getting this now? I think this example should make it a little more clear about why this is the correct answer. Even if you got it by process of elimination, now I think without process of elimination, you should be able to figure this out. Loyalty, cohesion, those are positive. That is the definition of EC. Those are not positives of ethnocentrism. That is within the definition of EC what is happening. It's not positive of ethnocentrism. A very subtle difference, exactly. That's why that option B with the word features is a trap option choice. It's beautifully designed. All right. So I hope you guys had fun with this first question. Now we are going to go to the second question. But before I do that, let's cement some learnings from this. Okay. What do you not need to ace GMAT RC? Firstly, you do not need to be an English wizard. Again, remember, we still don't know what the meaning of the word schismatic is. At least I don't know. Did it matter? No. In all your GMAT RCs, typically you'll always come across one or two words that you don't know. But you have to learn to trust the test maker. He or she, the test maker, is not going to throw anything at you which you cannot understand. If it is important, you will be able to infer the meaning from context. If it is not important, it will not be tested. That's the first thing you need to know. You do not have to mug up vocabulary on a daily basis. This is not GRE, right? You do not have to be an English scholar. You do not have to worry about unfamiliar words. Complex sentences. Look at how we broke down. This entire passage, by the way, is just one sentence. But look at how slow we went, how we broke it down. And by breaking it down, how we were able to infer 3 pieces of information from just that one sentence. You also need not have specific subject knowledge. I told you I'll be talking about topics, right? How many of you are from the background where you know what is ethnocentrism, even without looking at this passage? Most of us, you'll see zero, no, exactly. Most of us don't come from a background. So if you're an engineering grad, there's no way this comes in your regular background. You might know it just by accident, but it's not your core subject. And that's the core point I want to make. Really, and I really mean this, the topic in RC does not matter. If you're able to apply the right reading strategies, if you're able to read passages the right way, you will be able to extract everything you need to solve GMAT RC. Topic agnostic is what I'm talking about. You don't care what the topic is. All right. So what is it you need? What we did in this passage. We did not read this, by the way we read storybooks. You saw how we draw inferences. From 4 words, we draw an inference. From the next 4 words, we draw another inference. Then we looked at keywords. Then we asked what is following. It's a very active, immersed way of reading the passage, as against your casual reading. That's what you typically see when you read a storybook. 100% immersion will help. Read the passage for comprehension. You saw how we broke down sentences. In this case, this was one big sentence. We saw how we focused on keywords. Those give us meaning. And we saw the power of summarization. All right, so who's ready for question 2? Perfect. So the key point which I want to emphasize again is make sure you try to apply what you learned right now. All right. So let me first hide question 1. And just like the last time, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to put in done reading the passage here. Get ready for question 2, guys. All the best. Guys, there are around 200 of you here. Please make sure you press yes if you're done reading. That way I know to move on. All right, thank you for that. So let me bring in the poll for the next question. So the last question was main point. This question is inference. Make sure you guys click on still solving at the outset. And while you do that, let me bring in the passage for any of you who need the passage for reference. Just one sec. Let's kind of create a little more space maybe, or I'll keep it here for now. Okay. All right, guys. So all the best. Here's the question. It's an inference question, mind you. There you go. All right, many of you are done. Let's take another 10-15 seconds. All right, guys, last 5 seconds. Most of you are done. 3, 2, 1, and let me end the poll. So very interesting results. So let me broadcast the results. 43% of the batch chose option B, and the next popular option is option E, which is chosen by around 24% of students. So let's have fun with this question. Let me take this away. We won't need this for now. So how was this question? Rather, first, how was this passage? The question comes later. How was the passage for you? Let's hear some thoughts. Easy, decent, quite a few hards, complex language, a little bit difficult, understandable. All right. Easier than the first one. Oh, I'm happy to see that. So, how many of you were able to use what we learned? How many of you tried the approach that we presented in the last question? Try but fail, don't worry. You're introducing you to this now. If it was that easy, you know, everybody would get 90th percentile and above. Everybody would get a 730, right? It takes a little bit of time. But once you really bring in a little bit of practice hours with this, you will see the magic as far as all GMAT RC is concerned. And you will say, for those of you who believe that RC is your weak point, if you're able to do this well, from being a weak point, you will say that RC is your strongest suit. RC will become your strongest piece. And that's something that I have seen personally. All right, so let's discuss this question. As always, pay a lot of attention to the analysis piece because that's where the core application of reading strategies is, okay? So before we get into that, let me bring in this parallel example and I want you guys to answer this question. And let me bring that situation. Where is that poll? Here it is. So the color, imagine that I am the author, all right? For all practical purposes, right now I am the author. I tell you, the color blue is considered to have a soothing effect on the moods of people. The question I have for you is, what can you infer from this statement? I'll give you two options, and let me bring in the poll for this as well. Let's take another 10 seconds for this. 3, 2, 1. All right, so let me end this and let me broadcast the results. So around 67% of the batch chose option 1, and that means 33% chose either option 2, or you said that both these are inferable. 67% of you are correct. 33% of you are unfortunately incorrect, and that could be the reason you went wrong in this question. So pay a lot of attention to this. So when you say the color blue is considered to have a soothing effect on the moods of people, the question you have to ask is, who is doing this consideration? Who considers color blue to have a soothing effect? Is it necessarily the author? Can you 100% be sure the author also considers blue to have a soothing effect? That's the question you should ask. Some of you may think, hey, isn't this just active voice converted to passive voice? The author has just converted it to passive voice and say the color blue is considered to have a soothing effect. Some of you will have that doubt. The answer is, unfortunately, even if it was a case of passive voice, the problem is the way the sentence is worded, you still do not know with 100% certainty that the author has also considered blue to have a soothing effect. You cannot infer. And inference means you're 100% certain about it. The way the sentence is worded, it leaves ambiguity. The color blue is considered to have a soothing effect, but you don't know whether the author is part of those people who consider blue to have a soothing effect on the moods of people. Which is why the correct answer here is only statement 1. You cannot 100% be sure that the color blue is soothing as per the author. You cannot be sure about that. So the next question, if I was the author, if I were the author, how would I put this if I wanted to make sure that you know I believe blue has a soothing effect? I would put it this way. If I say the color blue has a soothing effect on the moods of people, here you're 100% sure the color blue has a soothing effect as per the author. Inference can't be restatement. Fantastic. We're going to discuss that. I'm going to prove you wrong, unfortunately. But it's a very good point. We're going to address that, by the way. Thank you. So, the color blue has a soothing effect on the moods of people. Is this point clear? The difference between the first statement and the second statement. All right, let me maximize this as much as I can. That's about it. All right, perfect. If this is clear, then some of you might have observed, at least the ones who got it right, you guys would have definitely observed there's something very similar happening in this passage. If you notice this, you would not have chosen some of those options. If you did not notice this, then you fell for one of the trap option choices. It's exactly the same, right? Considered to be, deemed to be. Exactly. I love when people say yes, so I know that you guys are getting this. Perfect. So EC, again, let's call this as EC. Why call it ethnocentrism again and again? EC and its canonical variance. So you may not 100% know what canonical is. I in fact know this meaning. It's something like identical, but even if you do not know that, just move on. EC and its different variations or variants are deemed to be, or in other words, are considered to be intimately connected with something called xenophobia. Let's call this XP. That's the first, this is where I first draw the line. The first inference here for you, which you should have picked up, is not necessary that the author believes this. It's not necessary that as per the author, EC and XP are intimately connected. All you can say is, definitely there are some people who exist who believe that EC and XP are intimately connected. Is this clear to everybody? This is very, very important. This is the core. Perfect. Now let's move on. then you have xenophobia, then you have a comma, and then you have this entire long piece of text. A complex attitude system cum sentiment structure involving aversion, dislike, etc., towards the alien and everything that the alien represents. So what did we do the last time when we saw such extremely hard to process information? Even in the last passage, you did something, right? And that's what I want you to do this time also. Not read it, absolutely not. You should read it. You guys should you guys summarized it last time, right? When you had that information overload moment, didn't you guys summarize and tell me that, hey, love for own people is linked with hate for other people? So why don't you try summarizing this in your own words? In your own words, if you had to explain this information to me, how would you do that? Yeah, some of those answers are already correct. Hate the strange, fear of outsiders. Yeah, I can understand that. Dislike towards a stranger. Very fantastic answer. Hate for outsiders. So you guys are getting it, right? At some level, some kind of hate, dislike, aversion, maybe fear, I don't know, but some kind of that negative feeling towards the stranger or the foreigner. This was my way of summarizing this, but you guys got this when I asked you the question. The point is, when I ask you to focus, you're getting it. When you start reading it also, you should be able to get it. So the next question I have for you, you guys summarized this entire thing and you figured out that, hey, this means hatred for aliens. The next question I have for you is, this seems to be a definition, right? This seems to be what xenophobia is. The question I have for you is, whose definition is this? Is it something the author agrees with? Is it the author's definition that the author is providing to you? Or is it some third-party definition like last time? Yes, this is where there's a learning point for you. So for all of you who think that this is not a definition the author agrees with, that's where the shock comes. This is a definition that the author agrees with. The key point is you need to look at that comma. So EC and its canonical variants are deemed to be intimately connected with xenophobia. This deemed to be is only for the connection between EC and XP. So there are some people who consider that EC and XP are intimately connected. That's it. But what follows the comma is what the author is providing to us, the readers, as the definition of xenophobia. Let me give you an example to help you along in this journey, in this particular point. So let's take XP. So yes, the right choice is E. Some of you got it. It's fantastic to see that. Let's look at this question. Look at that first statement, guys. Verbo is considered a unicorn, comma, a company with $1 billion valuation. Now tell me, whether Verbo is actually a unicorn as per, whether Verbo is considered a unicorn, as we discussed, we are not 100% sure whether Verbo is a unicorn as per the author. But does the author agree that a unicorn is a company with $1 billion valuation? Just look at the way it is written. What is a unicorn? A unicorn is a company with $1 billion valuation, right? Verbo may or may not be a unicorn, but what is a unicorn? That's where that comma comes in. Unicorn, which is a company with $1 billion valuation. Look at the next one also. Google, an internet company, is considered a good buy. So as per the author, we are not 100% sure whether as per the author, Google is a good buy. We don't know. But whether Google is an internet company or not, does anybody have any doubt? Does the author disagree that does the author say that no, Google is not an internet company? No, right? The author believes that Google is an internet company. It's not neutral. It's essentially the author giving you what Google is. He's presenting that as a fact for you to take in as the reader. If we, in case we don't know what a unicorn is, the author is providing us the definition of what a unicorn is. What is a unicorn? A company with $1 billion valuation. Yeah, I'm coming to that. The author will agree with the definition. Why? Because he is providing that definition as a fact. Is it up for debate in this passage whether is it up for debate here whether a unicorn is a company with $1 billion valuation? The author is presenting that to us as a fact, right? When we are reading this, we are considering that a unicorn is a company with $1 billion valuation. If this is clear, come back to the passage and look at this. Xenophobia, comma, and what is xenophobia? As per the author, a complex attitude system, etc., etc. So fundamentally, this is the definition of xenophobia as given to us by the author, all right? And which means the author is giving this definition for us to understand as a fact, and a fact is definitely true as per the passage. Okay? So that's a good question. If the author restates what is widely accepted, how do we assume that he's not himself? That's the question. You see the difference between how it's presented here and how it's presented in the last passage. In the last passage, when the author wanted to indicate to you that, hey, this is not necessarily something that I agree with, what did the author do? He used one definition. He never said the definition. When the author says the definition, that means that this is the definition which he also agrees with. Here very similarly, the author doesn't say xenophobia, one definition of which is that it's a complex attitude system. He's not saying that. He's telling you xenophobia, comma, and this is what it is. That's the point you need to take. So the definition of xenophobia which you guys arrived at here is a factual definition that is provided by the author. An inference in RC is entirely what the author believes in. So you have to assume the author is right. We may not agree or agree with him, absolutely. So, is this point clear, Umil? I moved ahead accidentally, but is this point clear? Is this coming through? Can I move on? Perfect. So, let's recap because we discussed quite a few things. EC and its variants are considered to be connected with xenophobia. So, as per the author, there are some people at least who believe that EC and XP are intimately connected. Next, the author tells us, as per the author, what exactly is XP? What is XP? You guys told me hatred for aliens, negative sentiment, dislike towards aliens. Now let's move on. Some socio-cultural anthropologists. Yet again, what I want you to take away from this is, when the author wants you to know this is not necessarily his or her opinion, see how he or she lets us know. He's not telling you, he's specifically telling you some other people, not necessarily me. Some socio-cultural anthropologists even considered XP and EC opposite sides of the same coin. Let's pause here, it's very important. So, some of you lost this question because you guys were confused by opposite sides of the same coin. Because you saw the word opposite. But the point is, opposite sides of the same coin. In a coin, you have heads and you have tails, let's say. The one thing you can be 100% sure of is, if you take one coin, if you take the same coin, if you have heads, by definition, you also have tails. You cannot have one without the other. So when you say opposite sides of the same coin, what that means is, hey, these two things, xenophobia and ethnocentrism, may be opposite, but the fact is, they are extremely connected. They are so strongly connected that they're practically coexisting. You cannot have one without the other. If you look at one, if you take a coin, if you have one side, you also by definition have the other side right there, because it's part of the same coin. Do you guys see the actual meaning of opposite sides of the same coin? That's very, very important. Some of you, it's opposite, but what the author is trying to say is they're so related that they're practically coexisting. And some of you, because of the word opposites, must have got confused here. Two sides of the same coin means opposite sides of the same coin. It's the same. So now the next question I have for you is this beautiful keyword even. What exactly is even doing here? Can anybody say that? That's a very interesting and beautiful point. What exactly is even doing in this passage? Why did the author use that word even? Mockery. That's a very interesting way to look at it. Some of you are getting it. Emphasizing, extreme, additional. You guys are on the right track. So, even is the keyword. The minute I see even and I read this particular part, you have to start connecting it with what you read in the last line. So, some of you are getting this spot on 100%. EC and its variants are considered to be intimately connected with XP. So as per some people, EC and XP are connected. That's point number one. Now the author says that, hey, then there are these other anthropologists, some other anthropologists are there. They say that, hey, EC and XP are not just intimately connected, they are so connected that they are practically opposite sides of the same coin. They are so strongly connected beyond intimately connected. They're so strongly connected that they practically coexist, which is what you see with opposite sides of the same coin. Do you get this? It's a very interesting point, how the word even is actually being used. Even is what we call an emphasis keyword. I'll give you an example which will make this extremely clear. All right. For those of you who are a little hazy about this, look at the examples that I've provided here. Shaq was the most dominant basketball player of his time. Some analysts even consider him to be the most dominant player of all time. What does this mean? So firstly, Shaq was the most dominant player of his time, of his era. But there are these other analysts who say that, hey, he's not just the most dominant player of his time, he is the most dominant player of all time, increasing that, taking it to that next extreme, increasing that emphasis. Do you guys see how that's working? Does this example help? Does it make it clear? We'll come to that again, don't worry. But is even clear to you? Perfect. Even can work the other way. When I put not even, look at the second example. GDP is increasingly a poor measure of prosperity. It is so bad that it is not even a reliable gauge of production. I'm telling you that it is already it's an increasingly a poor measure of prosperity, but it's so bad that it cannot even measure production properly. Decreasing emphasis. So what is happening here is the increasing emphasis. First, the author told you some people believe EC and XP are intimately connected. Now the author says, hey, there are these anthropologists who believe that EC and XP are not just intimately connected, it is connected to the next level. It is even more connected to the level that they're practically opposite sides of the same coin. In other words, they practically coexist. When you talk about opposite side of the same coin, what is the one thing you know? If you take a coin, if there is a heads, there is also a tail, right? You cannot have one without the other. That's what you mean by coexist. You cannot have one without the other. Is this clear? Now is this clear? Now we're pretty much done with the passage, so we're almost done. Perfect. Any further questions on this? Do put it in the Q&A. We will help you out with that as well. But I think that this point has come through to you. Now let's move on. So let's recap again. EC and its variants, as per the author, so at least some people believe they are closely connected, intimately connected. Then the author defines XP, and this is given as a fact. He or she has given us the definition of XP. All right. But then there are these other experts, these anthropologists, who take it to the extreme and say that they are not just well connected, they are so connected that they practically coexist. And then you have this keyword but is a contrast keyword. So here we told that they are extremely well connected. So what I'm expecting to see, what I'm predicting here is it's not that well connected also. Okay. So but a few voices have cautioned that this need not be the case. Again notice how the author makes sure you know, not necessarily me, boss. A few voices have cautioned, not necessarily me. So if you really think about this passage in entirety, everything you learnt about EC and XP is pretty much opinion, some third party opinion. You're not 100% sure what is being said by the author. The only thing you're 100% sure is something the author agrees with is the definition, because he gave you this definition. And that's why, by the way, option E is the correct answer. I see some good feedback. Thank you for that. I hope it helps. All right. So same exercise as last time, guys. If you have understood the entire nut and bolt of this passage, there are 4 points you should have taken. What are those 4 points? Fundamentally, firstly, as per the author, XP and EC are intimately or closely connected. Then the author defines what is XP so that we have context. Then, as per the author, there are these other socio-cultural experts who believe that they are not just connected, they are so well connected that they practically coexist. And then there are these other people, whoever these other voices are, who think otherwise. 4 pieces of information if you really go through this passage well. So just like the last time, it's the same question I have for you. Is there anything you are not able to pick up out of all these points? Let me bring that poll here. How can we do all this in-depth analysis in 2 minutes? Trust me, you can, but we are going to discuss time in a while. Today it seems like a long thing, but in the exam, once you have reached a level of mastery, this is not going to take you any time. Around 56% of you, around 30 of you say understood all. I'm very happy with that. For any of you who missed on any of these points, go back to this analysis. You'll get the recording anyway. Go back to this analysis, see what is it that you were not able to figure out. That's where your learning will come from. All right? Good. So now let's go to the question. If the passage analysis here is clear, don't worry, we are going to provide analysis for all options. Before we jump into the options, this is a case where I need to sensitize you to something else about GMAT RC inferences. Because typically, and one of you rightly pointed out in the comments, typically when you talk about inference, it's a logical deduction, right? Typically when you say inference, it cannot be the same point that is given here. Some information is given in the passage. When you talk about inference, typically it's a different point that you logically deduce. This is the understanding we all have about inference, right? Which is correct. I'm not saying this is not correct, but as far as GMAT is concerned, both in CR and in RC, the definition of inference is if the information given in the passage is true, which of the statements is 100% true? That's it. If the information in the passage is true, what is 100% true? Now the question here is, when you say what is 100% true, it can include restatement of what is given in the passage also. It does not exclude that. So though typically the way we have been taught inferences, our understanding of inference is that, hey, it has to be a new logical point. But remember it, on the GMAT, both in CR and RC, an inference is simply what is 100% true if your given information is considered to be true. So, which means a restatement of information that is given in the passage is also a valid inference on the GMAT. Now, in CR, we see this very rarely. Very few questions will have this pattern. It's really like 1 or 2% of questions in CR that we have seen. But in RC, it is actually fairly popular. You will always see these kinds of things. So don't go by the thing that inferences cannot be a restatement. It can be. That's the first thing I want to sensitize you about. The second piece, as somebody pointed out, is an inference is what the author believes to be true. If a third party believes something to be true, as per the researchers, as per anthropologists, we don't care. An inference question will say according to the passage what can be inferred or something like that. When you say according to the passage, who wrote the passage? The author wrote the passage. It has to be something which is from the point of view of the author. What that means is, for example, in this passage you saw EC and XP are considered to be intimately connected. We are not 100% sure whether the author agrees with that, which means it cannot be a valid inference for this question. Restatement, as in we'll look at restatement. Option E is a restatement. We'll come to that. An inference can be deduced from any fact mentioned in the passage. It can be a restatement of any given information, or it can be a completely new logical deduction also. Both are possible. So a correct inference on the GMAT RC, unless mentioned in the question that you're looking for the researcher's inference or scholar's inference. Typically, when you say according to the passage, we are concerned with this person, the author. If you're not 100% sure the author believes in it, it cannot be a valid inference. The last point I want to sensitize you about is this. Remember, I told you the definition that's provided. The fundamental understanding of GMAT, the test maker, is that the author is a logical and sensible person. If the author has presented something as fact, a fact by definition is considered to be true, and if it is true, anything that is definitely true is considered to be a valid inference. That's the simple point. It's as simple as that. So what is the one fact that is mentioned here? What is the one thing here that is mentioned as fact? That is the correct answer here, because everything else is random opinion of we don't know who. All right, so now let's look at, yes, definition of XP, absolutely. Now let's look at each of these options, and we're going to run through this very fast because I think you guys are getting this. Option A, firstly, what is a valid inference as per the passage? That's our question. XP and EC are different facets of the same concept. Or in other words, opposite sides of the same coin. Same concept, different facets. Opposite sides, same coin. But the problem is this the author's opinion? 14% of you chose this. This is not necessarily the author's opinion. This is anthropologist's opinion. We don't know. You cannot be 100% sure the author agrees with this. Therefore, option A, rejected. By the way, this is what I want to emphasize to you. If you understood this while you're reading the passage, rejecting this option will take you less than 5 seconds. The minute you read this option, you'll reject it. For those of you who are wondering, hey, how is it that you can do all this and still, finish RC well in time? The answer is, you do passage analysis at this level, you spend very little time on option choices. Your analysis of the passage is so strong that you run through the option choices, which is what we're going to do now. Sorry about that. So option A, I think, is clear. Let's move to option B, which is the most popular option choice. It is chosen by 43% of the class. But now, 43% of the class, you did not pay attention to what deemed to be or considered to be means. If you had seen this while you're reading the passage, the minute you read this passage, the minute you read option B, you're like, hey man, but this is not necessarily the author's view. You will reject this within 5 seconds. That's as simple as that. Ideal time for RC, we're going to discuss that, don't worry. But 3 to 4 minutes for reading a passage and less than equal to 1 minute for each question. And we have proof of that. We'll show you how it's done also, don't worry. So those who chose option B, do you see why option B is not correct? It's only because of deemed to be. You paid attention to this, you would not choose option B. Perfect. Good. Let's go to option C. Simple. Option C, thankfully, was not chosen. Here's the thing: a lot of you may not have chosen option C because you believed that XP and EC are connected. But in reality, that's not the reason why you reject it. The reason is they may or may not be connected. We have no idea what the author's view on this is. That's the real reason you have to reject it. So even if you rejected option C, the reason has to be not because XP and EC are connected as per the passage. No, we don't know that. It's because as per the passage or as per the author, we really don't know if they're connected. It's only third-party opinion at this point. Option D was also somewhat popular, but option D is easy to eliminate because it has this word causality. There is absolutely no causality in this argument, right? Does it say that EC causes XP or XP causes EC or anything else causes nothing? Nothing is there, right? You should not have chosen option D. Which brings us to the only option here, which is a valid inference. Why is it a valid inference? Because this definition is given to us by the author as a fact. A fact by definition is considered to be true, and if something is true, even if it is a statement from the passage, it can be considered to be a valid inference. That's the only reason option E is correct. So I think you guys learned a bit about inferences as far as GMAT is concerned also today. So this, by the way, is your own summarized definition of XP, which is true as per the passage. So with that, we're done with my portion. Now I will be passing the buck to Shraddha, who's going to take you through the big passage, the 700 level passage. Eventually, what you need to do. All right, somebody asked what an inference is. Don't worry about what an inference is. An inference is what is 100% definitely true given the information in your passage is true. That's it. This can be a logical deduction that is completely new, or this can be a restatement of information that is already given, which is option E, for example. Option E is given as the definition of XP. That's about it. So again, what do you actually need to do for acing GMAT RC? 100% immersion. Again, most of us are not from the background where we know what these topics are. We don't know what is EC and XP and all that. But we can. All it requires is that motivation thing I talked about. You really have to get into it. Read the passage slowly. Again, one of the things I always talk about what is called as active reading. Active reading means not the way you read your storybooks, the way you skim through news articles, not at all like that. See how we are reading slowly. We are making inferences. The minute you saw even, you saw how you connected it to sentence one to actually understand what the author is trying to say. Have you ever done that while you're reading a storybook? The answer will probably be no. If you've done that, very happy for you. But exactly, it's comprehension. You're not just reading. But that's the kind of thing you need to do when you're doing GMAT RC. You need to slow down, read slowly, make those connections, draw those inferences. That's when you really get that huge percentage of understanding, 90+% of understanding. Summarize. In this case, the correct answer was your summary, but every time you get stuck, always summarize what you have seen so far in your own words. It makes it easier to understand what follows. All right. With that, let me close this. Again, before I pass the buck to Shraddha, if any of you are interested in looking at a study plan, especially those of you who have not yet made a plan, who have a little bit of time to spare for the GMAT, if you guys want to, you can definitely check out the study plan link. Let me just bring that in here. It can definitely help at least some of you, because when you talk about GMAT, once you have set a date, once you have decided that I'm going to write it in 2 to 3 months, you need to properly make a plan. Rajat already discussed this. You take the Sigma X mocks, you arrive at personalized milestones based on where you stand, based on how good your ability is. For example, I am fairly strong in RC, but SC is a weak point. I'm not going to spend that much time on RC if I have to start preparing for GMAT today, and I'm planning to write it next month. I'm not going to spend that much time preparing RC because I'm already strong in RC. On the other hand, my SC is bad, so I'm going to spend a lot of time on SC. So based on how good you are, based on your starting ability, personalized milestones, which are very, very personalized to you. It's based on your strengths and weaknesses. Very precise estimates in terms of time. So the study plan that we built, it takes into account the time that you have available on a typical weekday, the time that you can spare on your typical weekend, your actual planned test date, so on and so forth. It kind of gives you that precise estimates of what you should prepare and when you should prepare. More importantly, we help you out with metrics. How do you know that you're on track? How do you build that confidence that, hey, RC is in my control, or SC, whatever it is in my control? How do you know you're learning? So we need those metrics. So we also teach you how to look at metrics. So for those of you for whom this makes a lot of sense, make sure you do that. Thanks a lot for the lovely feedback. I'm very, very happy to see that. With that, I will pass this to Shraddha. Shraddha, all yours.
Hello, everyone. If you guys can hear me, could you please put in your response as yes? I just need to make sure that I don't have any audio issues from my end. Okay. I have about 145 folks in this room right now. Can I see a little more enthusiasm, if I can say so? Yes. All right. Thank you for your responses. Before I start, I would just like to thank Harsha. That was a wonderfully conducted portion. I think he took us through the very basics of RC, and he made us learn some very fine points that probably we never thought about, basically. So thank you, Harsha, for that. Okay, so now we've come to a part where we are going to solve an official passage. Okay, this passage has about, and I'm moving your study plan thingy for a bit. Okay, so we are going to solve an OG passage. This passage is a medium passage, I would say, but again, a fantastic passage to drive home the point, the importance of looking into and analyzing the keywords. Okay, so before I show you the question, let's do the eGMAT drill. Let's click on still solving. I need to get that number because I am not going to time you. I don't want time to be an excuse for you not doing well in these passages, okay, when you have the potential to do that. So with this process, we make sure that I mean, you are basically setting the pace of the class. As soon as I see that 80% of you are done reading the passage, that's when, oh, okay, I'm showing the question poll. Okay, so that's when I'm going to show the questions. Anyway, I'm going to skip that part when I show you the first question. So here is your passage. In case you need a little larger view, let me adjust the screen here, because many a times I've heard students say that if you could increase the size of the text on the screen. There we go. So let's take about 4 to 5 minutes to read this passage, and I'll definitely take the pulse of the class at the end of about, 3.5, 4 minutes to see where you are, and then we will start solving the questions. We'll solve all the questions and then we'll come to the analysis of this passage. Okay, so all the very best. Try to apply. Only saying try to apply the key reading strategies. If nothing else, please at least do the summarization and take care of the keywords. Okay, all the best. Just a reminder, if you are done reading the passage, please say yes in the poll so that I would know that you're done reading the passage. That's when I start showing you the questions, once I see that most of you are done doing so. All right. Anybody else who would want to say yes? You're done reading the passage. All right. So I'm going to show you the questions in next. Let's wind up reading this passage in 10 seconds. Because in the interest of time, because we have 5 questions and then we'll have the analysis as well. So, not trying to rush you here, but yeah, we'll have to take care of the time as well. Okay, so 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, so while the passage is still here, I'm going to take away this thing from there. Here I go with the poll. Anybody who missed clicking on still solving the last time can do so right now, because the poll is back up again here. What I'm going to do is, in the meanwhile, I'm going to pull out the passage so that you have it on while you answer the questions. So I'm going to shrink the passage here because now you don't need it that big. Here is the passage for your reference while you answer the question. It's a scrollable pod. You can scroll up and down through this pod to get to the relevant portion. So do so. Here comes your first question. I'm reading the first few words. The passage is primarily concerned. I'm doing so to make sure that you are all on the right question, because for some of you, it may take a few seconds for the screen to stabilize, okay? So the first question is our main point question. All the very best. All right, last 10 seconds. Let's wind this one up. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay. Please make your decisions fast. I'm going to end this poll now. All right. Okay, let me end the poll. Let me get you the poll for second question. Please click on still solving. Before I show you the question quickly. All right. There we go. Here is the second question on the screen. All the best. All right. I have gotten most of the responses. Those who are still making up their minds, please do so fast. We have 10 more seconds to finish this one up. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. All right. Ending the poll here. Moving on to our third question. But before that, our ritual. Please click on still solving. All right, votes are coming in faster. Let me show you the third question here. There we go. It can be inferred. So before this, we did an inference question. Question 3 is also an inference question. So all the best. All right, time to move on to the next one. Last 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Okay, I'm ending the poll here. Bringing in the poll for question number 4. There we go. Still solving, please. Click on still solving, please. All right, few more. Okay, so here is question number 4 on your screen. The author mentions patients' ages. That's your question number 4. All the best. Last 10 seconds before we see our very last question for this session. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I'm ending the poll here. Bringing in the poll for the very last question of this passage. So let's do still solving. Last question. I'm not gonna bother you after this. So yeah, let's get some more responses there. A little bit more. A little bit more. Okay. All right. So let's move on to our very last question. According to the passage, which of the following describes? For this question, I would say read the question very, very carefully and then select the proper answer. Okay. So all the very best.
All right, let's quickly wind this one up. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Okay, here I end the poll. One thing I must tell you that I got very neat answers for most of the question except for question 5. So we will definitely discuss all of that. But before that, let's move on to understanding the passage. Okay, so the sentence starts by saying, and I'm just getting my pen ready over here. Yep, this is fine. Frazier and Mosteller assert that medical research could be improved by a move toward larger, simpler clinical trials of medical treatments. And this is where I pause because I want to understand what this passage is going to deal in. And therefore, paying attention to the first sentence of the passage is very, very important. More often than not, the gist of the entire passage is encapsulated in the first line. So basically, here it's a suggestion by somebody called Frazier and Motzeller. So I'm going to shorten this one up and I'm going to call them F&M for my ease of reading. So F&M assert, this is the word that really caught my attention because the author doesn't say that F&M says or F&M say or F&M suggest. He says F&M assert. That means there is a degree of emphasis in what F&M is saying. So they are very convinced about what they are proposing. And what is their proposal? Their proposal is that medical research could be improved. It can be made better. How, we do not know. But what I mean to say is that in what sense, we do not know that. But it says that it definitely can be improved. And then they suggest 2 ways of doing that, by making it larger and by making them simpler, by making larger and simpler clinical trials of medical treatments. Now, when I read this part of the sentence, it really struck me because how could you make something larger and then you could make it simpler at the same time? And then you're saying that doing these 2 things would actually improve the clinical trials. So this was my point of interest. I really wanted to read, okay, let me read this passage to understand how making something larger can be done simultaneously by making it simpler as well. Okay, so reading further, currently, all right, I think this is a very natural progression of the passage here, because if F&M are suggesting to make something better, definitely we need to understand how it functions today so that we can compare the suggestion of F&M with the current situation and then can understand that, okay, the suggestion really talks about improvement. So currently, researchers collect far more background information on patients than is strictly required for their trials, substantially more than hospitals collect. Now, all this information is fine till I hit this point over here. Now we see that this is an extra information that the author has put in there, and it presents a comparison. The reason for this comparison to be there in the passage is just to emphasize on the point that current clinical trials do collect a lot of information. They collect far more information than anybody else does, probably. I mean, those who are already known to be collecting a lot of informations, these clinical trials actually collect even more than that. So it does collect substantial amount of data, and that's what this comparison is trying to suggest, that they do collect a lot of data. And then I read this word thereby, which is presenting the effect. So if this is the effect, definitely this is my cause over here. right? So researchers collect far more background information. That's the cause. And what is the effect of that? Thereby escalating costs of data collection, data storage, and data analysis. Because these clinical trials collect so much data, it leads to the rise in the cost of three things: collection, storage, and analysis of all those data. Then I see a contrast word over here. Although, so I know that, I'm going to read two pieces of contrasting information here. What's the first part of the contrast? Although limiting information collection could increase the risk that researchers will overlook facts relevant to a study. Okay, that's one argument that, hey, why are you saying let's not collect so much data? What if we overlooked something? F&M have an answer to that as well. They contend that such risk, never entirely eliminable from research, would still be small in most studies. F&M, they are ready with their argument. They say that, hey, yes, even if, no matter what amount of data you collect, there will still be some chance that you cannot completely ignore all the factors, or you cannot it cannot be so that you will always be able to collect all the related information. There could still be a chance that probably you left something that could possibly be useful for that clinical trial. So that risk is not entirely eliminable. That risk will always be there, but they say that that risk is very, very small. And then they say, only in research or on entirely new treatments are new and unexpected variables likely to arise. For example, the world never saw anything like corona before. It's a completely new ailment. And when the clinical trials take place for corona, yes, the researchers are expected to collect a lot of data because this particular ailment or disease has never been studied before. But F&M say that, those diseases that have already been studied, you can most certainly cut down on the amount of data that you collect. That will improve the medical trials because, the risk of leaving out something will be very, very small in that case. So with this, we come to an end of our first paragraph, and these are the key points that we learned in this paragraph. Okay, so if I were to ask you this, okay, let me just take this part away from here, and let me ask you a question. Clear all answers, open poll. So F&M talked about, okay, I think it's already there on the screen, so no point asking this question. Paragraph 1 is actually talking about, so F&M suggested two aspects of it: make the clinical trials larger and simpler. Paragraph 1 is talking about making these trials simpler. How? By collecting less data. This is what we understand. So after we have, so yes, the first paragraph is talking about the benefits of making the clinical trials simpler as suggested by F&M. Reading the second part, F&M propose not only. Whenever we read not only, we know that at some point in the sentence we will also read but also, which means that this sentence is going to talk about two different aspects about the same thing. F&M propose not only that researchers limit data collection on individual patients, that is to make it simpler, but also what else they should do? Researchers enroll more patients in clinical trials. This is another cause. Why I say? Because I read the word therefore here, which presents an effect. Why they should research enroll more patients? So that the result would be thereby obtaining a more representative sample of the total population with the disease under study. So at this point in time in the passage, we can make an inference. The inference is that the way the clinical trials are done today, currently, they do not present a very representative sample of total population. So if we need to get more representative sample, we need to include more people in clinical trials. And that's why the suggestion comes from FNM. And then the author explains this point further. Often researchers restrict study participation to patients who have no ailments besides those being studied. A treatment judged successful under these ideal conditions can then be evaluated under normal conditions. Okay, so so here there are two phrases that are very, very important. Okay, so the first phrase that is very important here is normal condition, and then the second phrase that is important to understand is ideal conditions. Why? Because if we don't understand the meaning of these two phrases, we'll not be able to answer questions in the passage, right? So that is why it is important to understand. What do we mean by ideal condition? Ideal condition is that condition, according to the passage, is that only those patients are taken into the study who are suffering from just one condition. We are all human beings. We all have our experiences. Does it really happen that we suffer from one physical condition at one given point in time? Does that really happen? I mean, really not. I mean, come to think about it, there could be multiple things going on in our body. We may be aware, may not be aware, but that is really an ideal condition, that we just have that particular ailment about which the study is being made. But what is more normal condition? A normal condition is when we have other things going on. Okay, that's what normal condition means. So FNM are suggesting that, hey, stop only including those people into studies who only have that ailment. Include more people. And what will be the result of doing so? The result will be that the treatment that would come out from the clinical trials of people who have other ailments as well, the efficacy of the treatment will be assessed more successfully. Then you will be able to see that the treatment that you have come up with, whether it works on a large population or not. How those people react to the treatment who have more ailments besides the ailment that have been researched. Okay, so this is the whole point of paying attention to ideal conditions and normal conditions. Okay, so it's important that you understood this part, otherwise it's going to get confusing when you answer the question related to this part in the passage. So here our passage analysis, basically this part of the passage talks about making the trials larger, and it presents the benefit of that. In the first paragraph, we read how clinical trials can be improved by making it simpler, cut down on the amount of information collected. In the second part, it says, hey, include more people, include people with more normal conditions so that you can get more representative sample. Okay, reading the very last bit of the passage, broadening the range of trial participants, FNM suggests. So here again, we are reading about a suggestion, how FNM are substantiating their suggestion that they have made, that, include more people. Broadening the range of trial participants would enable researchers to evaluate a treatment's efficacy for diverse patients under various conditions. So that's one point of it. Would enable researchers to do what? Number one, to evaluate a treatment's efficacy for diverse patients under various conditions. This is what we spoke about just before this line, that they can still be able to understand the effectiveness of a treatment on those people also who have other ailments at that point in time. And the second part is to evaluate its effectiveness for different patient subgroups. So you will not be able to see the effectiveness of the treatment on a large group of people, but also on different patient subgroups. Well, patient subgroups have not been spoken about so far. So author understands that point, and then he moves on to present an example for our better understanding as to what patient subgroups mean. It means the value of a treatment for a progressive disease may vary according to a patient's stage of disease. So that's one group. This part of the sentence talks about patients suffering from progressive disease. I'll take a very common example here. Cancer is a progressive disease. We all know that it has several stages, and the next stage is more advanced than the preceding stage, and different stages have different treatments, right? So according to the suggestion of FNM, they say that, hey, if you include more people, you will be able to understand the efficacy of the treatment on people having this kind of ailment as well, who are at different stages. You will be able to see that the treatment that you've come up with, whether it only works for patients, say in stage 1, 2, 3, for patients in stage 4 or 5, you might have to change the treatment. It will not work on them. So this can only be achieved if you get more people into your experiments. Then patients' ages may also affect a treatment's efficacy. Another example. This is another example of patients' subgroup. The first subgroup is people suffering from progressive disease. They can be in different stages. And the next example that the author presents here is patient's age. We all know that, say, fever, right? A teenager has a fever, a toddler has a fever, and an adult has a fever. They all might be given a paracetamol or an ibuprofen, but the doses for that medication would be different according to the age, because different age group requires different doses of the same medicine, right? So this is how we understand, sometimes it's also helpful to think about these what shall I say, these very day-to-day practical examples to be able to better understand what the passage is saying. And I'm not saying that, in the exam time, this will all come very naturally to you. No, you'll have to get into the habit of applying these process over and over again, so that you develop that muscle memory, that the moment you see things like that, it's not a concentrated effort on your part to think about such parallel of such analogies or such practical examples from your life. Okay, so yes, second part also emphasizes or brings about the benefits of the suggestion made by FNM. So this is what our second paragraph told us. On your screen, you can see the passage summary. The first paragraph is all about making the simpler trials. There's not much risk. Cause and effect is already given. They are collecting way too much information, and that's why the cost is escalating. But if you go by FNM's suggestion, the cost will come down. The second paragraph talks about the benefits of larger trial. The results will be more representative, and then the efficacy of the treatment can be seen on a large group of patients belonging to different subgroups. Okay, so what I feel about this passage is that, though I didn't get to ask you because we are already half an hour above our stipulated time, what I feel that the information in the passage is not very difficult to gather or to extract rather, but it's the question and answers that gets a little more tricky. That's what makes this passage kind of 700 passage. So, okay, let me bring in the results for your questions that you solved. Okay, so first was the main point question, very simple. What is the purpose? So we see that the passage starts with the proposal, And then throughout the passage, the first paragraph deals with the benefits of making the trials simpler, and the second making it larger. Okay. So if I were to show your results, most of you did select the correct answer, which is describing proposed changes to the ways in which clinical trials are conducted, because that's the very first line of our paragraph. So, I mean, it is choice D is uncontested. The next one that comes is choice C with just 15% compared to 61% that we hit for this question. Evaluating an analysis of certain shortcomings of current medical research practices. You know, I call this a classic case of word jugglery. When it comes to writing really convoluted answer choices just to confuse students. Evaluating. So evaluating, as we saw earlier or as we heard from Harsha in the previous part of the presentation, that evaluation means pros and cons of an analysis. So pros and cons of an analysis of certain shortcomings of current medical research. So basically, what this answer choice is saying, that the passage is all about presenting the pros and cons of the negatives of the current medical trial research. Now, if I were to ask you this, how many of you would change your answer from C to D? I think all of you who selected choice C will definitely move on to choice D, because that's real. There's no mention of the suggestion by FNM. It's only focused on current medical research practices. Where is the suggestion that would improve the clinical trials? That part is totally missing from choice C. So it's completely out of scope, Okay, let's take a look at question number 2, which is our inference question. As far as I remember, I did see a very neat answer for that, very less contests in this one. Let's first understand the question. This question mentions a particular sentence or a particular statement from the passage, and we need to infer something from that. Okay, so this statement appears in the second paragraph, where the author is talking about FNM's suggestion about making the clinical trials larger. So it says, so what can we basically, where is this? Okay. Just a second. To just often researchers restrict study. Okay, we are. Oops, they are moving without me doing anything. Okay, so here the author was talking about ideal situations and normal conditions, right? So we understand that when the medical trials are only restricted to participants who have only that ailment, the result is not very representative. That's what the paragraph says. So that's the first inference that we can draw about often researchers limit the participation to ideal conditions. The second inference that we can draw is that it only, I mean, yes, it is already stated in the paragraph, but as we saw, that an inference can be a restatement of an information already present in the passage, right? So these studies only cover ideal conditions and not the normal conditions. So with this understanding, whichever part we see in the answer choice should be the correct one. And nicely done with choice A, although your accuracy with this question, if I compare it to your first question, is slightly lower. 61 was there. Here we see 54, yet you got it right. Its findings might have limited applicability. I will only talk about choice D because I see that it's at 28%, the next best answer choice. It would allow researchers to limit information collection without increasing the risk that important variables could be overlooked. Now, data collection, if you remember, is mentioned in the first paragraph. And the first paragraph talks about making the trials simpler. It's got nothing to do with including more people into the studies, right? So this is totally out of context. It is not in the context of making the trials larger. This statement was made in the context of making the trials simpler. So this is another way in which the question makers exploit our understanding of the passage. These are the things that we need to guard ourselves against. Okay. So here choice A indeed was the correct answer. Another inference question is, why have we simplified the question here? This is one more important aspect of RC. See, your reading and comprehension does not end with the passage. You'll have to continue to read your questions well so that you understand that what exactly your question is asking you, and you should be able to understand the information presented by each and every answer choice so that you can make that decision that, okay, the information in this answer choice fits the bill of the question. It exactly does what it is supposed to be doing, what's been asked. Okay, it can be inferred from the passage that a study limited to patients like those mentioned in lines, whatever, would have which of the following advantages over the kind of study proposed by FNM. So basically, the sentence is asking you, hey, what's that advantage about the current clinical trials? So the only advantage that we can think about is that in the current trials, the participation is very limited. And because the participation is very, very limited to only those people who have just that ailment, the current clinical trials do not deal with a lot of information. They have to assess, or they have to evaluate a limited amount of data. Okay, so and I think most of you understood this because 60% of the class in here, let me broadcast the result, 60% of the class did go with choice C. It would limit the number of variables researchers would need to consider when evaluating the treatment under study. Now, one may ask that, hey, how come this became an advantage? I mean, we are only talking about how FNM's suggestion can enhance these clinical trials. I mean, if they have an advantage, why to change? The thing over here to understand is, I mean, it's not an advantage as such, but if you were to really compare it with the suggestion made, then this is the only thing that you could identify as an advantage. That, okay, I mean, still, the current way they are doing, they'll have to look through, less information because or maybe they'll have to deal with only that disease. They'll have to study only that disease, and they'll have to make their research only in that line and not thinking about what's going on with the other ailments in the subject. So that way it's an advantage. Okay, moving on to question number 4. The author mentions patients' ages in the line, patients' ages may also affect a treatment's efficacy primarily in order to. This is a function question. Why do we call it a function question? Because here the test maker is asking us to find out the purpose of a particular sentence or a particular phrase or a particular expression. Okay, so why? What is the reason this particular statement has been mentioned? So the reason for that is, and we see this is the very last line in the sentence. So before that, we learned that FNM is saying that, hey, increase the number of patients that you take in for the clinical trials. Why? What will be the result? You will get more representative sample. And how does it translate? It translates in a way that people with various patient subgroups, you'll be able to find out the efficacy of the treatment on different subgroups, right? So if it is on different subgroups, patient age also makes a subgroup. So basically this particular statement right at the end of the passage has been used to substantiate or to support the suggestion made by FNM. If FNM is saying that make the clinical trials larger, this is going to be the effect of it, and this is a positive effect. So this particular line has actually been mentioned to support the suggestion made by FNM. That's the crux of it. So if I were to show you your results here, I think you did pretty good with this one, because I do remember one straight line going all the way, and that is choice D. Illustrate a point about the value of enrolling a wide range of patients in clinical trials. Okay. So that indeed is the correct answer. I'm moving on to question number 5, because that question requires a little bit of discussion, because there's always a contest between one wrong answer choice and the correct answer choice. So let's take a look at that. According to the passage, which of the following describes a result of the way in which researchers generally conduct clinical trials? So basically, this question is talking about generally conduct clinical trials. That means it's talking about something to do with the current way of clinical trials, not FNM's suggestion, right? And it's talking about cause and effect. Basically, you need to figure out the result of this current trial. So if you remember, in the first paragraph, what was the result? Thereby escalating. I don't know why does this happen. Okay. Thereby escalating costs of data collection, storage, and analysis. That's the first effect or result that the author presents of the current way of doing the clinical trials. In the second paragraph, however, here, thereby obtaining more representative sample. So here the effect has been given for FNM suggestion, but from the context, as I told you, we can draw an inference over here. This can also, we can deduce, or we can infer that, okay, the way the current clinical trials are done, they are not very representative. Their application is very, very limited, because then whatever follows, it just shows that, okay, what will happen if you include more people? Okay, so if FNM is going all the way to describe all that, we understand that the way clinical trials are done today, they are only done in ideal conditions. This is mentioned in the passage, but they have limited applicability in real life. And that's why that whole thing between ideal conditions versus normal conditions. So here, and let me bring in the poll and show the answer. Passage question 5, and there we go. You see, 30% and 38%. Actually, most of you did go with choice C. And let me tell you what's going on over here with choice C. Okay, let's first read choice A. They expend resources on the storage of information likely to be irrelevant to the study they are conducting. Okay, so many of the students reject choice A, and let me know how many of you did reject choice A on this basis. Many of the students say that, hey, in the first paragraph, there are, escalation of cost is related to 3 aspects: collecting, storing, and analysis of data, right? But this sentence or this answer choice talks only about storage. Where are the other 2 aspects? Okay, where are the other 2 aspects? But again, think about it. It says cost goes up for A and B and C. Okay, the cost goes up for all these. But this answer choice has only chosen to talk about B. Is it incorrect? Is it wrong to say that they expend resources on storage of information? Think about it. I mean, yes, the cost goes up for A and C also, but it does go for B. So again, a very craftily created answer choice. This is correct information because the cost for all these three go up. If they are collecting it, they'll have to store that information, and later they spend all the more money on analyzing those information as well. So the cost of storing the information also goes up. So choice A indeed is the correct answer. Now let's take a look at choice C, why it is incorrect. They avoid the risk of overlooking variables that might affect their findings, even though doing so raises their research costs. Okay, firstly, we don't know whether research cost, goes up, whatever, due to variables and all. But let's talk about this. When we say they avoid the risk of overlooking, remember this thing. Paragraph 1 clearly says that the risk of overlooking a particular variable is not entirely eliminable. It cannot be avoided completely. That's not possible. That will still remain there no matter what amount of data you collect. So avoid the risk of overlooking, that situation is never met. That point never comes in any of the clinical trials, because there still will be some risk. But FNM say yes, if it's a new study, yes, then you collect all the information. But if it's if that particular ailment has already been studied before, then you don't need to worry about that. That risk will be very, very small. Okay, so that's why choice C is incorrect, because it does say that risk is not entirely eliminable from any risk. And thanks, Raja. Thank you for putting this up here. Let me just here. The risk that researchers will overlook facts, never entirely. Okay, it's all highlighted there. Never entirely eliminable. That means that risk will always be there. So there is no way they will avoid or ignore or just throw it out of the window completely. That will never ever happen. Okay, so yes, choice C, again, a very crafty answer choice. It's a snare. It's a visible snare there. Okay, so these are the snares that we need to keep ourselves guarded against. Okay, so I guess I'm pretty much done here, and so I'll hand over the session back to Rajat. He can take you through the last bit of the session that we have. And thank you so very much for participating so enthusiastically with me. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And I hope that is something which is absolutely clear. Question 5 was indeed tricky. It was only 30% of you got it right. But what you can really see is how in official questions they play on what we infer from the passage, and essentially to get this question right, you have to be absolutely clear of what the author was saying, and versus what FNM were saying, and essentially you had to infer the piece where they never entirely eliminable doesn't implies that they don't avoid or they can't completely avoid something. Okay, so again, the key thing that we want to focus on is essentially when it comes to GMAT RC, it's about comprehension. You can't hack your way through. You can't skim through a passage. A lot of experts, and again, let me ask this question: how many of you have heard people say, "Focus on the first line of the passage, focus on just the first paragraph," and because that's kind of where the gist would be. How many of you have heard people say that? Again, if you got all right, that's perfect. Over there, that's wonderful. Again, that's not, you can't hack through GMAT RC. GMAT RC, it's called reading comprehension. Comprehension is an essential part of it. So you've got to comprehend, and the way to comprehend is to follow these reading strategies to understand what the author's, when the author is actually saying something as a fact versus when the author is presenting someone else's opinion. And you've got to develop that sense for it. You've got to get into the habit of comprehending, which means summarizing information every 2 or 3 lines so that you can put stuff in context. And why that's important is because, hey, that if you don't do that, that could be the difference between a 650 or a 730 or a 600 or a 730. And essentially these 30 points or could be the difference between getting into a top B school, getting scholarships, or essentially, having an ROF close to $500,000. And again, the difference between a 650 and a 730 is actually very, very valuable over here. So to get to that 730 score, you need to aim for that 90th percentile. To aim for that 90th percentile, you need to improve your comprehension. And to improve your comprehension, we always recommend that you read slowly. A lot of people think, how many of you have really heard this before? Or rather, I've heard something which is counter, and you can type in counter or similar to say, hey, got to read slowly in RC. How many of you have heard this before? And to how many of you this comes as a surprise? Never, okay. The thing, and this is not just true about RC, in fact, SCCR, in fact, even in quant, the slower you read, the less is a chance that you're going to reread stuff, which means the faster you're going to solve questions. I mean, or in other words, for those of you who've solved questions, why do you take longer? Because you go through the prompt again and again, right? You go back, read the passage, and in CR argument, you go back, read the argument. In SC question, you go back and forth and figure out, is this correct versus is that correct? That indecisiveness is what causes delay. When you read slowly, you get clarity, you're not indecisive. And which is where, actually in June, we'll account for about 66% of all 700 plus scores. Now, how does reading slowly lead to actually you getting through the test faster? Here's how people typically go about doing this. Most people actually read the passage fairly quickly, okay? If you read, and they spend about 2 minutes, which is why they spend about 2 minutes reading the passage, and essentially, which is why they need about 90 seconds to 2 minutes to answer every question. Now, if you read slowly, you'll spend about 3 minutes reading the passage. When you spend 3 minutes reading the passage, you'll comprehend more, which means when it comes to answering questions, you'd need about a minute per question. So overall, you'll take about 7 minutes reading getting through the passage. You'll be much more confident. And as you go from passage A to an SC question or a CR question, you're going to find your mind's not stuck with that passage. Has this happened with people? You solved an RC passage, you weren't sure of the answers, and as you move towards the next question post the passage, you're still thinking about the passage, you're still worried about did I solve that question correctly? If you read slowly, as long as you're confident about it, you won't worry about it. If you don't worry about it, you'd focus on the question on hand rather than worrying about, hey, how did I do in the last passage? If passages are difficult, some people find humanities passage to be difficult. Others find actually sciences passage. You have to read slowly. There, it might take you even 4 minutes, and that's okay. And that's okay. Why? Because typically passages that are more challenging have questions that are easier. Remember, the GMAT has to equalize time. So if a passage is going to be more challenging, the questions usually are easier to get to when if you comprehend the passage. Yes, and the same thing applies in CR too. Okay, in CR we ask you to visualize, and essentially visualization takes time, but because you visualize, you get through the answer choices fairly quickly. Okay, now people who practice this thing called speed reading, I don't even understand why does speed reading exist, frankly. Why? Because as managers, you're required to make good decisions. You're not required to just memorize stuff. People who practice speed reading go through the passage in about 2 minutes, and they take a lot longer solving questions. And so they spend the same 8 minutes, but they're not as confident answering those questions. They make more mistakes. And the lingering thought of whether I answered the question correctly stays with you post that. Okay, so don't do that. The focus on learning how to comprehend, timing will take care of it itself. And this is something which a lot of our students have said and have experienced. I mean, we won't have these many 700 plus scores, guys, if these things didn't work. So one of our former students who's from Colombia, she said, hey, when it comes to RC, you should read all the text, not just the first or the last sentence. As long as you understand the whole paragraph, it takes only 30 to 50 seconds. Okay. For those of you who attended our RSC session, you know how we focus on aspects of a sentence. This is what we mean when we say read everything with that SC hat. There's another guy who went to Colombia. He actually sent quite a few students to Colombia. He says, what you have to realize is that you have enough time to cover all questions. Do not stress about timing at all. Take 3+ minutes to read a passage and comprehend. That's a short passage, and 4+ minutes to comprehend a long passage over here. This was the guy who used to do speed reading, and when he did that, he was stuck at a 680. The moment he slowed down, he was able to get to a 740. He got multiple full rides. He actually got a scholarship from Colombia as well. Okay. He shared his ESR, and you can see he took about 2 minutes per question in RC. You can see his timing on other sections as well. Okay. Another guy, Rohit Singh Malan, he prior to following these methods, or when he was doing tricks, or he was following tricks as he read them in the blogosphere, he actually went through the passage again and again, but after he slowed down, this is what happened. Okay, but again, it's not just something. It's not a decision where you have to say I've slowed down. It's also about slowing down, going through things slowly, and making it a second habit. And when you make mistakes in the process, and you will, reinforcing and figuring out where you've made mistakes. Okay, and you can watch. Actually, this number is now. This is about 3 months ago. This is 167 right now. You can watch 167 such instances on our YouTube channel. I can share the link to our YouTube channel here. So, and you can see people, vouching for these strategies. And when you look at any of the other folks who talk about tricks, who talk about shortcuts, who focus on the first and last line, go and on the YouTube channel, see how many success stories they have. And these are unedited success stories. These are not people saying, hey, eGMAT's great. These are people describing their journeys. These are people talking about where they faltered initially, doing the diagnosis of why they faltered initially, and then talking about how they changed their mindset towards the GMAT and what happened once they changed their mindset. And again, we add 1 to 2 success stories every week. We get about 8 or 9 video interviews done every week. We just can't publish them. So, but as we publish those success stories, you can see the pitfalls that these folks have fallen into, and you can identify with what you've done, and in that way you can learn from their mistakes. So how does the 90th percentile guy go through reading comprehension? The first thing you do is you understand how you read a passage, which is where you go through a master comprehension course where you learn the building blocks of a sentence. You understand how do you deconstruct long sentences. And again, how do you get meaning out of a sentence? To do that, you also learn how to pause and where to pause while reading a sentence. And all of these skills are evaluated, as you can see these scores over here. Okay. Then in the RC course, you go through the reading strategies file. Once you know how to read a sentence, this then leverages those skills and combines them at a paragraph level. And again, these skills are evaluated in these practice files as well. And then you go through each and every concept, starting from the main point concepts and main point practice files. And again, as you do this, go through them slowly. A lot of people, when they study this, they go through this notion of finishing the course. Don't go through the notion of finishing the course. Go through the notion of, okay, learning and figuring out how can I apply this. Okay, and this is really important. Why? Because a lot of people think that the key to acing any subsection is to solve a ton of questions. On the GMAT, the answer is actually just the opposite. It's about spending more time on fewer examples, but understanding them inside out. And once you do that, you make fewer mistakes. When you make fewer mistakes, you actually improve a lot faster. Okay, so what should you do? When it comes to an RC passage, get immersed in the passage. You may hate the topic, still tell yourself, I love that topic. As you read, visualize it. How do you go about visualizing it? You use these reading strategies that Harsha and Shraddha talked about. And as you solve passages, it's, our Scholar Indian platform will give you data on why you're making mistakes, where you're making mistakes. Use data to isolate why and where, and then work on it. And once you do that, getting to that 90th percentile should become fairly simple. Okay. Again, if you need your study plan, I'm going to share the link to that study plan. As you do this, select where you're facing issues, and essentially you'd accordingly be paired with someone who specializes in helping people with those issues. Okay. Nishant, actually one of our former students, the guy who talked about, also went through this entire process. Okay. So with that, I want to thank you guys for joining me today, and then if I can get some feedback on the session, let me share the session PDF as well. So I have Pooja's question. What's the difference between a one-year regular MBA program in the US versus that in European B schools? And if you can get the feedback over here, that'd be wonderful. So it's an interesting question. And so US one-year MBA programs are usually designed for people who have a business undergrad or who